Okay, so yesterday we saw a really interesting tshuva from the Tzitz Eliezer, uh, where he was talking about reparations from Germany, whether you have to take Meiser from that, or whether that's considered to be compensation for money that they took from you, which was already tithed. It's amazing that someone came over to me because I mentioned this in brief in the Dvar Halacha yesterday. And someone came over and said, I'm so inspired that someone who went through the Shoah would be so conscientious about wanting to do the right thing halachically. Like if you went through something like that, if we went through something like that, how would we even retain our faith? That's sort of the question you sort of ask yourself, what would I have done after having gone through something like that? So anyway, that was an interesting point someone made yesterday. Okay, so this is a new section, it looks like, called She'elot Utshuvot V'chikrei Dinim, responsa and delving into the law. Um, so I don't know why this is considered to be a different section. We'll have to wait and see how he treats these things. Okay, Siman Aleph, Shimush b'chayfetz gazul shenityashu ba'alav mimenu. Are you allowed to use a stolen item when the owner has given up hope of retrieval? So the shehila is as follows: Chayfetz sheyadua shegazul hu bevadai, kagon kli misuyam o behema. So you know that for sure that something was stolen, like an appliance or an animal. Are you allowed to use or benefit from such an item when you know for sure that the owner has given hope of retrieval? So the response is as follows: Tshuva, asr lehanos midavar hagazel, vafilu hisyashu haba'olam mimenu. That would be asr, even when you know that the owner has already forsaken hope. Kevin sheyadua bevadai shadavar zehu hagezela atzma, since you know that the item is fenced, right? Meaning that even if you're not the Goslin, you just happen to know that it's gone into circulation, and you want to be able to use it. Let's say your friend stole it or he bought it from a Goslin, and he says to you, "Here, it's stolen, but I got a great deal on it. Bought it off of the back of a truck, and it's an amazing espresso machine. You got to try this espresso." And you got to say to him, "Look, I'm sorry if this was possibly a stolen a good. I can't benefit from it." And therefore, if you know that an animal or a utensil, an appliance, or a car is stolen, I think there's a lot of that in Mexico. Let's say your cab driver tells you just bought a new car off the black market, so you probably couldn't get into the cab, because that's what they do. They steal cars. They steal cars in LA, and then they send them. You know what a chop shop is? You ever hear that before?
Yeah, take the parts.
No, not only that, but sometimes they'll just take the parts. Sometimes they'll just strip the car of any recognizable features, like they'll scrape the VIN off, or they'll do a counterfeit VIN, and they'll take off bumpers and replace them with other things and repaint it and stuff like that. So, ein lirkov al behema zu olinso berechev zu, you're not allowed to ride the animal or go take a drive in the car, oli hikanes bevayis gazul, or to enter, even let's say a piece of real estate is stolen, right? You can't even go into the house. Even if you're doing so in order to get relief from the elements. Let's say it's hot and you need some shade, or it's rainy, you want to just get some protection. Or to pass through a stolen field. If someone stole wood and then made a bridge out of it, you wouldn't be allowed to walk across the bridge. And if you used something that was stolen, that normally a person would be compensated for that item, then you'd have to pay the true owner for the use of that item. Because let's say real estate remains in the chazaka, in the possession of the owner.
What happens to the Shabbos Saveda? Like you have to return, like you know it's stolen. What do you think about using it? He has to return it.
Right, but let's say it's not within my power to return it. I'm not in control of it. Like my friend's giving me a ride, or it's someone else's house.
So an aspect I'm trying to remember about if someone's miyayish and the person actually ends up thief owns it but then owes the money for it or something like that.
Yeah, that's the halacha.
But how would that work out? If the thief actually now owns it, could you then not benefit from it just because he's now the owner?
So how, right, what about the fact that after Yeush, the Goslin is now the owner? Okay, so that's what we have to analyze, and that's why he's going to go into further analysis over here. So he says, "Uvekesef Mishnah uvebeis Yosef, hevi moran ledivrei hatur sham, upalagal das haramim." So up until, let's see, oh, okay. So this is. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, so I'm. Right. So the answer is that you need two things in order for it to belong for it to completely change hands. You need Yeush and Shinoi Rishus. It has to change hands. So here, I guess the assumption is that it hasn't changed hands yet.
Or changed form. Is that the other aspect of change? Like he's actually changed
yeah.
hands?
Okay, so he quotes the Gemara.
I wonder whether this chop shop change is considered enough of a change.
Yeah. Yeah. You need both things. He says, if the bridge has been, let's say we said that you can't benefit from a bridge when the wood was stolen. That's only if it still belongs to the person who stole the wood. Let's say the person who stole the wood then donated the wood to the public works. Then you yeush im shinoi rishos. So then you have yeush and a change of possession. Okay.
Does he have to pay full for it in order to take on full ownership? The Goslin
The Goslin
has to pay for it.
right. So assuming that he's changed its form and the owner doesn't want the original wood back, so then he has to pay him for it. Yeah.
But the aspect of someone else benefiting seems to drop off.
Yes, that's true. So there are limitations to this prohibition. Okay, next. Liknos min haganav velehanos mechafetzav, to buy from a ganav and to benefit from his items. So a lot of this we've seen before. I guess maybe this section he goes through point by point. She'ela ha'im muter liknos min haganav o megezel. Are you allowed to purchase items from a ganav or a gazlan? So the tshuva is asur liknos miganav and migazlan. V'hakona mimenu avon gadolhu. It is prohibited, and if you purchase stolen goods, you're doing a very serious offense. Shaharehu machzik yidei ovrei avera, because you're supporting people and helping them continue. You're aiding and abetting thievery. And remember, we said more than the mouse steals, the mouse hole steals, right?
Mhm.
So you're the mouse hole because you're giving sanctuary. You're giving an incentive to the ganav to go ahead and steal. The kol shekain sha'asur l'sayei lahem b'gneivo b'gzela, and certainly you're not allowed to more actively aid and abet a ganav or a gazlan. V'chein asur l'sayei b'yadam lasos shinui b'chayfetz kadei sheyeh kanui lahem. Nor are you allowed to help them by, let's say they bring you an item like a car that they stole, and they ask you to modify it. That you're also not allowed to do. If you know, like if you're not allowed to own a chop shop where they're going to modify the car. Ulam im hakona miskaven liknos kidei lahachzur leba'olam kishen yicholas habalam lahotzim miyad haganav. If, however, the person, when you encounter stolen goods, you buy it with the intention of, I'll buy it so that I can return it to its rightful owner, mutter liknos is a, then of course it's permissible. Let's say I see a homeless guy selling a pair of tefillin or a talis, right? Right, which we know, you've seen those photos of the homeless guy wearing a talis because I guess he stole it off of the subway or something like that. So then you would be allowed to buy it off of him in order to help return it to the rightful owner.
Something like tefillin, wouldn't you just buy it to protect the career, even if you don't really use, just so it doesn't get.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
great.
that would be an additional reason, right? Let's see.
We keep mentioning Ganav and Gosling. The truth is, there's no difference at this point. It's not a law.
For these purposes,
Right, so we
there's
should,
no.
really should say just a stolen object.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay, so he's really just bringing the sources in the footnotes. Next, Siman Gimel. She'ela. Halacha rovachat biyadenu. She'ein hakarka niknes la'olam legazla. We have a well-established halacha that even if a person who stole real estate has held it for a number of years, it never transfers ownership, unlike chattel. Elahibir shus be'aleho medis, it always stays within the possession of the original owner. V'yesh la'ayin, ha'im hagazlan over below sasa shalo sigzol. Okeven sha'akarka ina nigzelas hagazlan ina over alavzeh. So then the question becomes, what is he violating, the gazlan? If he's, let's say, forcibly taken possession or has gotten the government to help him repossess someone's property, and really the halacha would not permit him to do so, is he considered to be a gazlan? If, after all, it's not considered his, he hasn't been able to make it his, halachically, it still halachically belongs to the original owner. Is he considered to be a gazlan, or is he doing something else that's prohibited? So the answer is davar zenech lekubo haposkim. Yesh omrim da'afal pi shekarka inin igzelis mikol makom over a gazlan below saso shelo lo sigzol. Some poskim say that nonetheless you're over on lo tigzol, even if you've never changed possession of the real estate, because the argument is that real estate, no matter where it is owned by one singular individual. By stealing it from him forcibly, you can't change title on that real estate. Nonetheless, these poskim say that the fact that you've deprived the owner of the usage of his property makes you into a gazlan. V'yesh omrim, but others say, shebigzelas karka ina over al halav shahar karka ina nigzelas v'yefshel lahazizam imakoma. Others say no, you can't move real estate from its place. It still belongs to the owner, so you're not over on lo sigzol. V'halacha k'dei rishona shehagazlan over alav shalot tigzol. We paskin like the first opinion. He quotes Tosfos. It may be considered to be masig gevul. In other words, the Torah has a separate mitzvah lo saseh of lo sasi gevul re'acha. You may not encroach on your neighbor's property. You're also over, so that's something that you could potentially be over. However, the prohibition of hasagas gevul only applies in Eretz Yisrael. Okay. Okay. All right. He's going through the various shitas. Let's go on to the next one. Siman Daled, Isser Gezela B'chol Shehu V'din L'kichas Davar Muat. Stealing a pittance of an item. In other words, when you steal something very petty. So Ha'im L'kichas Davar Muat Gam Nechshav Gezela. Is that still considered to Gezela? Or is that something else? So the tshuva is afal like taking a grape from the grocer, tasting when you have no intention of eating it.
Without permission to
Right,
buy them.
right. Right. So he says, Afal Pisha Asr Ligno Ligzol Afilu Kol Shumidin Torah. He says the Torah prohibits stealing even the smallest amount. Ulam im hudavar muat mamish ein derech olam lahakbid alav. But if it's taking something that generally people don't really care about, uchagon litol kisem mechavila o mibeged lachatzotz bo shinav. Let's say I go over to someone's garment and I pull off a piece of a chip of wood that is clinging to their garment. I just thought of let's say I go over to your belly button and pull out some lint, right? Right? Some lint from your belly button, right? Okay. In other words, it's really something that people really don't care about.
Or don't even want.
Olito ma'at tabak, or to take a little smidge of tobacco, which I don't know. What? Maybe. Because he knows that guys in the shul are always taking it. Or to take a match from someone's matchbox. He says that's mutter because the assumption is that you're not stealing because the owner doesn't really care about trifling things like that. Mihu midas chasidus yesh lo limnoa atzmo. However, it's considered to be an act of piety to refrain from any of those activities, v'lizoher gam bazeh, and to be careful not to take anything, even the most trifling thing, without getting express permission. Umikol makom im yodeya shaba olim makbidim gam bazeh asalo bitol me'uma. But in a situation when you know that the owner doesn't want people to take his matches, let's say, like he makes a little sign and puts it on the matchbox. Asr b'li rishus, yeah. So then you can't take even the smallest thing from him.
Like using somebody's pen and using up the ink.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Okay. All right, Takanas Hashavim. Now, this is the premise of this is something that we've learned before, that the rabbis made something called Takanas Hashavim. What is that? When a person steals something and puts in a lot of effort in order to rejig that item, such that if we were to force him to return that item, it would cost him an extreme amount of money in order to dislodge that item from the way he's jigged it or modified it or whatever. So then we allow him to pay cash, the cash value. The example of the Gemara of Takanas Hashavim is, let's say a guy goes to a lumber yard and steals a beam, okay? And then he builds it into his house, the central beam of his house, and then he overlays everything else in the house, the roof, the shingles, and he's been living in the house, and all of a sudden, the lumberyard guy goes, hey, that's my beam, give it back. So he's going to have to deconstruct, we'll have to remove the whole roof, and it'll cost him thousands of dollars to return a beam has significant value, but nonetheless, because it's going to cost him so much more, the rabbis wanted to allow a person to do the right thing without having to incur such huge costs. So they said, okay, normally you'd have to return the beam itself because it's still the same beam, but in this case, we'll make you pay for it. So on that basis, you have the following question. Hayim takanas hashavim shayeches gam ba'ofen shegazol karka ubana aleha binyan. What if I steal real estate and I build on that property? Okay, I'm sure you must have case law in this situation as well. A land developer encroaches on someone else's real estate and then builds a skyscraper. Okay, and now we've discovered that he's gone over the property line. So how do you deal with that?
Court usually would just order them to pay money, and the question is, how do you value the loss, right? Because
Right.
you might have deprived him of building his own skyscraper, so maybe you have to pay for that too. Loss of opportunity, stuff like that.
Right, right.
But I don't see any court telling them to rip it down, although I've seen cases where houses have been told to be deconstructed by the city, because there's no zoning,
Right.
permit. stuff
That's
like
right,
that.
that's
In terms
right.
of loss, yeah, you value the loss. I don't think you tell them to rip down the skyscraper.
Right, right.
See, like in Israel, illegal structures in across the Green Line and then pull them down, or the Bedouin encampments. And the food places.
Right, illegal structures, the government can tell you to knock them down, yeah. But here we're talking about private individuals where a guy's appropriated someone else's property and he's built on it. He says, Demina takana ein sarach laharos et habinyan. If we were to say that the takanas hashavim applies to real estate, you would not have to tear down the structure. Eliyitain damim keneged hakarka shegozel, but rather just pay for the real estate. O takanas hashavim shayach dafka b'metalton. On the other hand, you might argue that that's only something that the rabbis instituted for chattel that's stolen, not for real estate. Okay, so the tshuva is im gazel karka ubana aleha binyan o migdal uchedoime. If a person did steal real estate and then built upon it, bazelo amru chachamim etakanatam v'chayev laharos es dirato. In this case, the rabbis did not address takanas hashavim, and therefore halachically you would be obligated to tear down your structure, ulachzir hakarka leba'olim, and to return the property to the owner. Delo nemra hatakana ela b'metaltalim v'chafetzim v'lo b'karkos. The halacha of takanas hashavim was only an accommodation to a person who steals chattel, but not to a person who steals real estate. Now, where does this halacha come from? So this is worth, I think, looking into just a little bit. He says, Kain mavur b'tshuvas harashba, uva b'beis Yosef, b'choshen Mishpat, sof simin shin ayin vav. So this is where you can find it in the Shulchan Aruch. Sha'alta b'maseh gavul ubana kotel b'chatzar chavero. The Rashba was asked the following question, which is brought in the Beis Yosef. If a person encroaches on another person's property and builds a wall in the middle of his friend's courtyard, okay? So v'hichnis karka b'toch shelo ka'ama. He encroached, let's say, 1 cubit, which is about 1.5 feet. Ubana al oto kotel bayit gadol she samach alav. And then so he puts up a wall and then builds a house that goes all the way up to the wall. Okay? V'achshav ba balachatzer laharos kol binyano. Im nidon bazek kedin meiresh olo. So the owner of the property that has been encroached upon now is claiming that the guy has to tear it down, and he's going to tear it down if he doesn't. He'll get his sledgehammer and pickaxe, and he's just going to knock everything down. So who's right? V'heshiv al zeh harashba lo asu takanas hashavim rak b'metaltalin. The rabbis only made the accommodation of allowing a gazlan to pay cash when he steals chattel. Avol bekarka lo amru sheyimkor zeh et shelo v'yashchis es nachalasa. But when it comes to real estate, the rabbis did not obligate a person to give up his ancestral property. So they're looking at it from the rights of the landowner. This land has been in my family for centuries. And now you're telling me that I have to give up a strip of that property because this Gazlan went ahead and moved the property marker? So no, knock everything down.
That's in Israel only we're talking about?
No, it's anywhere. It's anywhere. V'chein kasav Rabbeinu Yerucham, the kasav sheken kasvu haga'onim, and this is also supported. Now he says in the next paragraph, hatam she'ein takonas hashavim. So why is it? He says, so he quotes the Beis Yosef, mishum dekarka ein an exelis, because you can't steal real estate. No matter how hard you try to steal it, it still belongs to the original owner. Takonas hashavim eina elahecha sheyesh legazlan kinyan gezela. So it's only when the gazlan has successfully acquired the object through maybe making a modification in it and the yeyush of the owner. Masha'enkin karka birshus marakoi. But real estate always remains in the possession of the original owner. This can be proven by a statement of Rabbi Eliezer in Maseches Sukkah. Shaposel lischach b'rishus harabim mishum delo havi sukkah shalo. That he says that if you build a sukkah on public property, it's not a kosher sukkah because the schach doesn't belong to you. V'im haisa takanas hashavim gam bekarka haisa hasukkah shalo. But if we were to make a takanas hashavim on real estate, we would say that the sukkah is kosher because you acquire it through takanas hashavim.
So there's no chazaka there. Oh,
What's that?
there's no chazaka in this.
No, not at all. So he says that v'hinei bisma kasav al divrei harama sham shapasak. So he says the Rama paskins this way, and the Sma comments on it. That what does the Rama write? The imgazel karka ubana leha binyanim gedolim shetzarach listorikol. The Rama writes, even if you put up big structures on that stolen property, you have to knock down everything and return the real estate. Tekevin shu davar kavua va'omed havalei lemeda deshala nigzalu v'lo havalei liknoso. And he says that this penalty is imposed even on the buyer from the Gazlan. Say a guy builds a huge mansion and then it's discovered that it's on encroached property. So we penalize even the buyer and we require him to knock down the house. He says, and the answer and the reason is because he should have done a more thorough title search. So that means that not only the original Gazlan has to knock down the property that he built on stolen real estate, but even a buyer from a Gazlan has to tear down the property. Because he should have made more thorough inquiry before purchasing something that was built on stolen land. Either because maybe he wasn't thorough enough because he got an amazing price on it, or because there weren't sufficient legal documentation to provide proof that this was all free and clear of any kind of controversy. And that's why there's something called a title search that you do before you buy a property, because the title search will tell you if this house is free and clear of anything.
Yeah, nowadays, actually, they took it one level higher. You don't even have to do title searches because you can always now buy title fraud insurance or title insurance. from the buyer. Which mitigates the reason to do title insurance. It doesn't matter. Your insurance will cover if you buy a house and title. And insurance
So let's say I buy a house and 10 years later, we discover it's on encroached property.
Have a policy of insurance that would cover its claims made. So it's at the time when the claim's made, you know, it kicks in.
Oh,
So that
Yeah.
policy lasts, it stays.
Yeah,
It stays
yeah,
life
no, I don't know, you know. Precisely what the, you know, coverage terms are, but. When we just bought, you just get your lawyer to buy you the title insurance and you're pretty much, you can sleep at night, you know, that there's. Mortgage fraud or title defects or anything like that, that assurance search might show or might not show. And you've got it covered, it doesn't cost you.
Is it standard, like the lawyers
Yeah.
are not gonna tell you to do
You'd be
that?
negligent if the lawyer didn't tell you, you know, you have the option of getting title insurance, do you want it or not? Who would say no? I mean, you'd say, you always say.
But wouldn't it just make sense to do a title search and they don't use that, like?
Title searches aren't always the best, and sometimes if there's fraud, the search will show that there's no mortgage, or there's a mortgage or whatever
Or
it
there's
is.
no lien or.
Yeah, it may not be accurate, that's the whole point, because fraudsters are pretty sophisticated these days, so they can
Mhm.
get around it. title
Yeah.
search, you know?
and with also data manipulation
Yeah,
in
all
today's
that
world,
stuff,
yeah.
right? So just-
All right, we'll hold it here for today. So the takeaway from today is always get title insurance.